French government is moving from Microsoft Windows to Linux. And when I found out which DRO they picked, I got really surprised. In this video, I'm going to share exactly what's going on and why you should be learning Linux today. Let's go. So this all starts with France declaring war on its dependence on American software. On the 10th of April, the French government announced a sweeping plan to migrate 2.5 million civil servant workstations from Microsoft Windows to Linux. This is one of the biggest moves announced in Europe. So why were they doing this? Well, this was announced in April, and back then there was this whole thing with the US tariffs and that kind of thing. And that really shook Europe awake to how dependent we are on US tech companies running critical government infrastructure for European governments, and even enterprises too. This was a real wake-up call for all of Europe, and it really showed how dependent we are on these services. If one crazy president decides that, yeah, you're not going to get access to Microsoft Azure anymore, then we are in big trouble. And this is why European governments and companies across the board are looking into moving away from these big American companies like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. But how did we end up here in the first place? And what is the problem? Well, before cloud computing was a thing, everyone was running their own services on premise. And on those servers and desktop workstations, you would have Microsoft Windows running. When cloud computing became a thing, Microsoft approached these companies and said, hey, there is this really cool new thing called cloud computing. And instead of running all of these servers on premise, you can just let us do that in our data center. It's much cheaper. And because you're already running Microsoft Windows, you're going to get a really good deal on this. And this is how they really got big government agencies and companies to sign up for Microsoft Azure and move all of their compute over there and host all of their applications. And now, basically, entire governments are being run out of American data centers. So it's cloud computing, but it's also the entire Office suite. When Dutch Parliament members are sending emails to each other, that mail is sent to a US server. It's living there. So all of that communication is living on a US server. It's maybe hosted in the Netherlands, but it's owned by a US company. And the risk with this is the US Cloud Act. As it's described, the US Cloud Act allows American authorities to compel US-based companies to hand over data stored anywhere in the world. So here's what this means. If a Dutch Parliament member is sending emails, internally or externally, that data is stored on a server owned by Microsoft, a US company. So if American authorities have a reason to compel Microsoft to hand over that data, it basically means the US government has access to all of the data the Dutch government is producing. And a quick correction worth making here, the Cloud Act isn't some brand new emergency power. It's been on the books since 2018. What's changed is how visibly it's being leaned on, including reported use of it as a show of power against the Microsoft accounts of international officials. That's what turns an abstract legal clause into something governments suddenly take seriously. In times of peace, when everything is going well in the world, this may not feel like such a big problem. But when you have a president who even threatens leaving NATO, this starts to raise real issues. And that is the reason governments like France, but also Germany and the Netherlands, are frantically looking into moving away from these US-owned companies. And it's not just France. Several of you pointed out that the Bundeswehr, the German armed forces, are also adopting NixOS. This isn't one country having a moment. It's a pattern across the EU, converging on the same conclusion at roughly the same time. So the French government has 2.5 million devices to migrate. 2.5 million devices that are currently paying Windows licenses every year. When you're considering alternatives to an operating system that is completely free, privacy-friendly, and can be modified to your own needs and security requirements, Linux becomes the obvious choice. So that's why the French government chose Linux. But then the question, of course, is which distribution did they pick? Now here's the part that surprised me most. The Interministerial Directorate of Digital Affairs is switching to NixOS. It has announced it will leave Microsoft and move toward a free operating system based on the NixOS distribution. This is one of the first times I've seen NixOS actually mentioned in a government setting, because it's a very niche thing. As far as I know, there are very few big companies or agencies using it right now, so I was genuinely surprised to see them going for this. But this isn't the first time the French government has used Linux. The Gendarmerie has run a custom Linux distribution since 2008. They've been running over 100,000 workstations on a distribution called Ubuntu, which is a customized Ubuntu-based distribution. If you check that out, you'll also find something called EUOS, which is a public sector community lab proof of concept for a common free operating system across the EU public sector. Very cool. So there's already an EUOS being developed, and this is essentially the foundation of what the French government has been using in the Gendarmerie. But I was really intrigued by the fact that they're using NixOS for a slice of the government. So what is NixOS? A few of you jumped in to correct something I should be precise about here. NixOS is not built on top of Ubuntu or any other distribution. It's fully independent from the kernel packaging all the way down to its own package manager. What makes it powerful is that you can define your entire computer in one config file. You literally write what you want and define it in code, and when you install your system, everything you put in that code is going to be there. That's the simplest way I can explain it. What this means is every machine can run identically, and you can build a full operating system out of a piece of code and deploy it to thousands or millions of machines from that same file. That is, of course, a perfect use case if you're trying to standardize something that needs to roll out over millions of machines. Now, real quick, if you enjoy this video or any of my other videos, please subscribe to the channel. It's a completely free way to support me, but each of these videos costs me $700 to produce. I have editors I have to pay, designers, and everything else. So it actually is a real cost for me to make these. Please, it's a free way to support the channel, but subscribing really does help. Thank you so much. This is very familiar to me from my own work as a senior DevOps engineer, where we write Terraform code to deploy cloud resources, or Kubernetes manifests to deploy workloads on our clusters. This declarative configuration approach is a well-known concept in DevOps circles. The cool part is that this is fully open source, and there are two operating systems being created here. The first is called Securix, a NixOS-based secure operating system tailored for small to medium-sized teams. It provides a minimal, hardened environment with strong isolation, reproducibility, and policy-driven configuration to ensure security and compliance. It's locked down and defined entirely in code. This is what the agency's own systems administrators are using, more for their internal power users. But they've also created something called Bureautics, and this is going to be the example deployed to Linux workstations for regular office staff, people who aren't used to Linux. The goal is to create something that feels like Windows and can be secured completely and easily by writing everything in code, so that when they make a change, they can roll it out to all of these workstations at once. It's a genuinely elegant system. One comment is worth sitting with here, from someone who lived this from the inside. A viewer with 33 years in IT described this exact dynamic playing out repeatedly in his career. IT teams warning management not to fall for the outsourcing pitch, warning that offloading the data center wasn't secure and being overruled anyway to save a few dollars short term. He spent his last 10 years fighting management to stop listening to third-party vendors pushing to host their data. That's the lived experience behind why these governments are now scrambling to build their way back out of that exact hole. I'm not a NixOS user just yet, although I'm very much attracted to it. The way it works is you have a default .nix file, and in this file, you define what you want to deploy and how you want your system set up. Let's say you want to install a browser on every machine. You define a firefox.nix file, and in this file you can install the browser and configure it. So, for example, they're adding bookmarks, GitHub, YouTube, all baked directly into Firefox. They're setting the home page to connect to a local dashboard, probably running on each machine. They're configuring all of the extensions, disabling Pocket, disabling Firefox accounts, disabling telemetry. In one file, they can define the standard configuration of what Firefox should look like across every single machine. That is incredibly powerful if you're installing a set of default tooling for thousands of users. So this is all about building their own operating system from scratch. The reason they'd go for something like NixOS is because it gives you complete sovereignty. NixOS is nothing more than a Linux kernel packaged with a way to configure it, an init system in this case, a bootloader, and a package manager, the Nix package manager. It's a very minimal way of defining a system. And if you build something like this yourself, you have complete sovereignty over the operating system your government is running on. This is all about building in-house skills to manage these operating systems yourselves, instead of depending on a software license from an American company that might even get access to your data. This is also exactly why I built my own Kubernetes home lab, where I'm self-hosting my own Git server, my own audiobook server, and so on, because I want control over that data. I don't need any American company looking into it. I want that sense of digital sovereignty that you can only get if you own the infrastructure and the applications running on it. And France is about to do that on a national scale. One viewer widened this argument past just operating systems, and it's worth including. Not too long ago, most organizations had the same sovereignty with Microsoft products too, running their own on-premise Exchange, SharePoint, and file servers under their own control. It felt expensive because you had to license the software and staff the expertise. Cloud got pitched as cheaper, and that's what pushed all of it off-premise into data centers controlled by a handful of large tech firms. Once you're there, you're at the mercy of whoever can compel that firm to hand over data or cut off access, and this viewer pointed out the same logic now extends into digital ID systems and connected smart home devices too. But there's a little bit of irony here, and a few of you caught it immediately. They're hosting their Securix code on GitHub, which is owned by Microsoft. That's a free tip I'm giving you, friends. Codeberg, check it out. Now, does this mean you should learn NixOS? To be honest, when I first heard this news, I was genuinely excited because finally there were signs of NixOS being adopted by a big organization. At least that's what I thought at first. But the thing is, and I say this because basically every video I make gets comments telling me I should try NixOS, that NixOS is perfect for me, that NixOS is definitely what I'm looking for. And honestly, I agree with them on the technical merits. But the reason I'm not using it is because I want to keep my skills relevant to my career. When I choose between NixOS, Ubuntu, or Fedora, I'm looking at how it impacts my career. And my career has been built on 10 years of experience running production systems on Ubuntu. Not all of those years were in official employment, but I've run my own servers for well over a decade, and that all counts as experience. CTOs respect that if you can prove you've run something in production for a long time. NixOS has a very steep learning curve. It's basically a whole programming language you have to learn. That's why I don't generally recommend people start with it. It takes a long time to learn. The documentation isn't the most accessible, and the community, while passionate, is still fairly small. So when people ask me if they should learn NixOS, I've always said no, that it's a much better investment in your career to learn Ubuntu or Fedora, which translates well to Red Hat. One viewer with real hands-on NixOS experience made a point worth adding, because it's more useful than a flat yes or no. In his experience, NixOS is a great concept, but implementation can be uneven, plenty of features aren't packaged yet, so you end up compiling or building your own. The declarative config has real upsides and real downsides. Hundreds of identical machines might actually be faster with a pre-built disk image, but many different machines needing roughly the same setup is exactly where NixOS earns its keep. It depends on your fleet, and that's probably the honest answer. But here's the tension I keep sitting with. I think NixOS is the right way to do this. Using the Nix package manager, storing multiple versions of packages on your system, rolling back cleanly, defining everything in code, that is the correct approach. I completely agree, and I've resisted getting into it for years, but I haven't because there's basically no career relevance yet. So when I first heard the French government was moving to NixOS, I got excited, thinking, finally, now maybe I have a reason to learn it. But when I started researching for this video, I had to manage my expectations, because I assumed all 2.5 million devices were moving to NixOS. It turns out it's only the Dynam piece of the French government making that move. They're migrating 250 employees to NixOS, currently testing about 40 Securix and 30 Bureautix workstations, and over the next year, they'll roll it out to the rest of that 250. So potentially the wider government could follow. But when this was first shared with me, I was told the French government is moving to NixOS, full stop. So unfortunately, it's happening on a much smaller scale than I initially thought. So what does all of this mean for you specifically? Should you leave Windows? The answer is absolutely yes if you have any value for your own digital sovereignty and privacy, because Microsoft is looking at everything you do. If you want to know more about why you should leave Windows, check out the video linked above. With all of these governments moving to Linux, there's going to be a ton of work that needs doing. I'm already seeing job opportunities opening up if you have Linux skills. So even if you're only using it at home right now, you're already building the skills that will help you land those jobs. I only see upside in learning Linux today. And should you learn NixOS specifically? Even after everything I've just walked through, my opinion hasn't changed. I still don't think it's a good idea to learn NixOS if your goal is landing a tech job and maximizing your chances. I think that's still a waste of time for most people right now. You're much better off learning something like Ubuntu because, as we saw, the Gendarmerie has operated Genbuntu across over 100,000 workstations based on Ubuntu. So statistically, if you want a job in the French government specifically, you've got 250 workstations running NixOS and 100,000 already running Ubuntu. Getting experience with Ubuntu is simply going to increase your odds. And that's also why I chose Ubuntu for the free 16-hour Linux course you can get access to through the link in the description below. I'll teach you exactly how to install it from scratch, how to install your first applications, and how to become a master of the command line. So there's tons of free material there, and a community of over 5,000 members, all learning Linux together. It's active, and it's a genuinely great place to learn and grow. Check the link in the description for the free 16-hour Linux course. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.